Good morning, church. Thank you for worshiping with us. And we are continuing our series in the book of Exodus, going through the 10 plagues. And today we are in Exodus chapter 8. And today we're looking at plagues 2 and 3. So the plague of frogs and the plague of the gnats. And as we look at these first few plagues, so these two and then the plague of blood, which we looked at last week, we may notice that these plagues are not the most severe of the 10 plagues, right? No animals are dying, no people are dying. But what we notice, especially this week, is that these first few plagues are really annoying. These first few plagues really emphasize the fact that you can't run away from what God is doing. And when we look at the plague of the frogs, it says that these frogs were everywhere. Most people, they have a difficult day, they have a hard day, and they kind of get into bed and they just leave their worries behind and they fall asleep. But with the plague of the frogs are joining you in bed. That's not an option. With the plague of the gnats, they are all over you everywhere that you go. These first few plagues are so annoying. And I think that that's interesting because these plagues start off with a sense of you will not ignore the presence of God. You must think about Him. You must respond to Him. And that's interesting because in 2020 America, we really live in an age of distraction. We live in an age of distraction, meaning if we're somewhere and we're bored, if we're in line at the post office or the grocery store, we can go shopping with our earbuds in. We can pull out our phone and we can check social media. We can distract ourselves from the boredom and the tedium of our lives. But not only that, many people hate being alone. They hate silence. They hate to kind of think through what's truly in the depths of their heart and their mind. There's things that they know they need to face that they're running away from and they don't want to face, so they distract themselves, right? With entertainment and alcohol, and again, with our phones, by constantly putting something in our ears or something in front of our eyes so we can distract ourselves from the burdens of our life. But what's interesting about these first 3 plagues is that they are a distraction from distraction. There is no closet or bed to hide in. There is no bubble to secure yourself. You are forced with facing God. You cannot distract yourself from His presence. And what we see today is we see 3 people's response to God. We see that the kind of the distraction is dying away and people are beginning to respond to God's power in Egypt. So for instance, the magicians, for the first time, starting with the plague of the gnats, they are unable to replicate what God is doing. And it leads them to say, what? Oh, this is the finger of God. We can't replicate it. We can't defend ourselves. This God is beyond what we're able to do. This God is beyond the power of the forces that we are utilizing. And they go to Pharaoh and they say, be careful. This is the finger of God. So we see them breaking out of their bubble and facing up to the fact that God is real. But we also begin to see that in Pharaoh and in Moses this week. And that's what I want to spend our time looking at today in these 2 plagues. And what we'll see is that our main point for today is this: to experience true joy and true freedom, to be someone that's truly in relationship with God, we cannot be merely acknowledgers, we must be followers. To experience freedom and joy, we must not be acknowledgers of God, we must be followers of God. And we see this in the paths and the responses of Pharaoh and Moses. So, let us start today by looking at Pharaoh. We're going to kind of jump around these 2 plagues. I want to look at Pharaoh, and then we will look at Moses. So, if we remember last week, the plague of blood, how does Pharaoh react to the presence of God? He really doesn't react, right? It says he hardens his heart, but it says that he doesn't even take it to heart. He kind of goes back in his palace. He ignores what's going on. He pays no attention to Yahweh. But this week, that all changes, right? In verse 8, or verse 8, a little bit into the previous verses, what we see is that Pharaoh begins recognizing the presence and the power of God. And he even tells Moses and Aaron, hey, I need you to pray to your God to free us from these frogs that are overrunning Egypt. In verse 8, this is what happens. It says, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Pray to the Lord," which is, again, Yahweh, God's personal name. "Pray to Yahweh to take the frogs away from me and my people, and I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to Yahweh." So last week, no reaction. But this week, what do we see in Pharaoh? He's recognizing the existence of Yahweh. He's recognizing the power and the might and the authority of Yahweh, but he's also recognizing his need for Yahweh, right? He looks at the frogs and he says, there's nothing that we can do to get rid of these frogs. My magicians can't get rid of these frogs, even though they can replicate them. We need your God, Yahweh, to get rid of these frogs. So Moses, Aaron, pray to your God and set us free from these frogs. So Pharaoh is acknowledging the presence and the power of God, which is wild. And here's something else that's wild about our God, about Yahweh. Pharaoh asks for prayer. Moses and Aaron pray to God on behalf of Pharaoh. And what does God do? He listens and he responds. And that might not seem that significant to those of us that are living on this side of the cross and we're used to forgiveness, but Pharaoh is a direct enemy of God, right? That's why all of this is going down. Pharaoh kind of claims to be a god. He worships false gods. He's keeping God's children from him. And then he says, God, take these frogs away from me. And you would expect God to say, no way. You are going to experience the fullness of my wrath and my punishment. These frogs will be on the land until they die of natural causes. But God doesn't do that. God hears the prayer that is offered on behalf of Pharaoh, and he relents. God shows his unbelievable mercy and his grace for his enemy Pharaoh, even while he's showing his wrath and his judgment. That's our God. He's just, but he's merciful, side by side. It's incredible. So that's how Pharaoh begins to respond, but look how it continues in verse 15. What does Pharaoh do? Moses and Aaron, they pray to God. The frogs disappear, and this is how Pharaoh responds. Verse 15. It says, when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. So, Pharaoh clearly acknowledges God. He acknowledges the power of God. He acknowledges his need for God. But once God fixes the problem, once the frogs are dead, Pharaoh just goes on with his life. He doesn't submit to God. He doesn't see a need to fall in love with God. He's merely an acknowledger of God, a user of God, a manipulator of God. He wants to stand over God and force God to do his bidding, but he has no interest in following God whatsoever. He just goes on with his life. And before we're quick to say that nasty Pharaoh, what a wicked, evil man, I mean, this should resonate with you. If you're reading this with any level of integrity and honesty, right? I think one thing that the book of Exodus shows us is that we are actually a lot like Pharaoh in our daily lives. You know, think about your prayer life, right? In this passage, Pharaoh prays to God, or he asks Moses and Aaron to pray to God, and we think, wow, okay, so he's submitting to God. Well, not really. Pharaoh doesn't offer a prayer to God of confession, saying, I've sinned against you and I'm wrong and I'm wicked, forgive me. No. Pharaoh does not offer a prayer of adoration. Praise to you, God. You are faithful and you're mighty and you're sovereign. No. Pharaoh's prayer is purely a prayer of supplication. Fancy word for give me the things that I need. Pharaoh does not treat God as if he's this divine person to be submitted to or praised. He treats him like a cosmic vending machine. Give me what I want, God, and then be gone. Now, what's your prayer life like? How often are you lobbing prayers to God that are just, Lord, get me here safely, give me this thing, allow this thing to go well, supplication, supplication, supplication. How often are you just sitting down and adoring God and praising God and saying, Lord, regardless of my circumstances, regardless of what I want and don't get, you are good. You're praiseworthy. Glory and praise to you, no matter what my life may demonstrate. You are worthy of praise. How often are we adoring God? Acknowledgers of God simply ask for things from him. Followers of God adore him and confess their sins, which we don't see in Pharaoh. But again, think about Pharaoh's response in verse 15. He needs God in that moment, but then once the moment's passed, once life is back to normal, he's on his own. It's his autonomy. He doesn't care about God anymore. Now, I've used this illustration before, but I think it's a powerful illustration of our human nature. September 11th, 2001, an awful day in our country's history. And what did we see in church attendance right after September 11th? Church attendance skyrocketed. People were scared. They needed direction. They didn't know what was going on, so they flocked to God. They're filling the churches. People are saying, I've been far from God for too long. I need to go back and be in the presence of God. And the Christian community goes, yes, we're back on our way to having a Christian society. Well, not quite. Because a few weeks go by, a few months go by, and life for most people kind of goes back to normal. You begin to feel okay again, and all of a sudden people go, I'm good. I don't really need God anymore. In fact, I'm fine just kind of being in charge of me. Church, for those of you that are currently kind of in a time that's good or okay, or you're not really having a lot of issues, what's your walk with God like? Are you praying much? Are you getting in the Word much? Are you saying, life's good? I don't really have a need for God right now. People that are merely acknowledgers of God don't spend time with him when life is good. People that are followers of God are seeking him when things are hard or even when they're great. So church, are you a mere acknowledger of God like Pharaoh is in this passage? Or are you a follower of God, giving all that you are over to him? So that's how Pharaoh responds to God in this passage. He wants to use God, manipulate God. He recognizes God's power, but he's not going to submit. Now, what about Pharaoh? Or not Pharaoh. What about Moses? Moses is kind of our positive example in this passage. And if we remember the background of Moses' story, Moses begins, God calls him. He has this issue where he says, listen, I can't talk. I'm unable to lead. And God says, okay, I go ahead of you, I speak on your behalf, but just to comfort you, Moses, let me send along Aaron, your brother, and he'll speak for you. And up until this point, that's exactly what's happened. Aaron's been the prophet. Aaron has been the mouthpiece. He's the one that's kind of spoken to Pharaoh and spoken to the people. But that begins to change in today's passage. In verses 8 and 9, Pharaoh speaks to both Moses and Aaron and says, okay, fine, pray to your God and take the frogs away from me. And who responds to Pharaoh? Is it Aaron? No, it's Moses. And in verse 9, Moses speaks to Pharaoh. It says, Moses said to Pharaoh, I leave to you the honor of setting the time for me to pray for you and your officials and your people, that you and your houses may be rid of the frogs, except for those that remain in the Nile. Moses speaks. And he's not speaking to some, low kind of person on the totem pole. He's speaking to the modern day Vladimir Putin. He's speaking to the modern day Kim Jong-un. He's speaking to one of the most powerful, wicked, scary guys to be alive at this time. And he's speaking. And he's speaking boldly. It's crazy. He says, hey, yeah, we'll fix it. God will fix it. You name the time, and God will make it happen. He's not only speaking, he's confident, he's bold, he's powerful. But not only that, look at what Moses says in verse 10. Moses says to Pharaoh, he says, it will be as you say, so that you may know there is no one like the Lord our God. Pharaoh, yeah, we'll pray, and God will take the frogs away, so that you will know that there is no one like our God. Now, why is that impressive? Because that's God's mission. We talked about that a few weeks ago. In Exodus chapter 7, verse 5, God says to Moses, I'm not just here to free the Israelites. I'm here to free the Egyptians. He says in chapter 7, verse 5, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. That's God's ultimate goal. I'm going to showcase my glory and my power, and not only will the Israelites see, but the Egyptians will see. And not only will the Egyptians see, but the nations will know that I am the one true God. Now, what's Moses' mission been up to this point? From the moment that God has called Moses to come to Egypt to set the Israelites free, Moses has kind of been a burden, right? From the beginning, he's made excuses. I can't go. Send somebody else. I can't talk. A few chapters ago, he went to God and said, Lord, this isn't what I want. You're not doing what I want you to do. This isn't working out the way that it should be working out. He's complaining. But what do we see here? He's on board with God's mission, not his mission. He's saying, Pharaoh, you're going to see that my God is glorious, and I can't wait for you to see that. You're going to understand that he is the one true God. Moses' heart is lining up with God's heart. Moses is laying down his mission for the mission of God. Moses is saying, more than any chapter previously, Lord, here I am. I'm obedient to you. I'll speak on your behalf. I'll speak boldly. I want to see your mission come to fruition because you are the one true glorious God. That is cultivating in the heart of Moses. How exciting from where he's been in the previous chapters. It's incredible. It's an incredible transformation. And don't we want to be like that, right? Don't we want to be like how Moses is in this passage? Some of you, depending on where you're at, might be saying, well, I don't really want to submit to God in the way Moses does. Okay, maybe not currently, but don't we at least want kind of the character that we see in Moses, regardless of who we are? He's confident, he's bold, he's got a mission, he's got a purpose, he's ready to go. So church, where are you at? Do you identify with Moses in this passage? Or do you identify more with Pharaoh? And I think that this COVID time, it really shows what's deep in our hearts. It shows us kind of which of these characters we look the most like. I mean, think about their situation versus ours. Very different, obviously. But in Egypt, as we look at the magicians and Pharaoh and Moses, they're going through a time of utter disruption. Regardless of if they're a friend of God or an enemy of God, everything is being disrupted. It's wild. The future is uncertain. It's kind of a scary, unpredictable, weird time. And we have the same thing now. Our lives have been disrupted. We don't know what the future holds. We can no longer rely upon the things that we've been relying on. And when that happens, our heart comes out. So in the midst of COVID, who do you look like? Maybe you found yourself looking like the magicians. Okay, God's out there. He's kind of scary. I don't know what he's doing, but I'm not really interacting with him. We're kind of detached. Maybe you find yourself like Pharaoh. You acknowledge God, you recognize God, but your prayers to God, your conversation with God is, Lord, fix this, end this. Make it like this. Lord, do and be the way that I want you to be. Act the way I want you to act. Prayers of supplication. Or maybe you find yourself like Moses. Looking at the other people and saying, I agree, this is a tumultuous time. This is a hard time. It's a confusing time. It's not what I want. And yet, I trust in God. It's his plan. It's his mission. He knows what he's doing. And I just want to be a part of it. I want to listen. I want to be obedient. I want to trade in the purpose and the identity that I've lost through my job. I want to trade in kind of the situations that don't look the same as they used to. And I want to trade that in for finding purpose and meaning in what God is doing right now. Who do you look like in the midst of this pandemic? Do you look like a mere acknowledger of God? Or do you look like a follower of God, seeking to submit the entirety of your life to him, trusting him? As Christians, as people saying that we're disciples of Christ, which is the mission statement of CFC, we're at least intellectually saying we want to be followers. We want to be disciples. We want to be like Moses. And hopefully you hear this message and say, I still feel that way. I want to be and look like Moses, not like Pharaoh. But let me be clear as we kind of conclude this message here. This is not primarily a sermon where I'm saying, be more like Moses, be less like Pharaoh. Because most of us would say, I do want to be like Moses. I'm trying to be like Moses. I want my life to look like Moses, but unfortunately, I feel like I look more like Pharaoh. I'm constantly just asking God for things that I want. I'm not reliant upon him. When things are good, I walk away. I want to be like Moses, Matt, but I'm more like Pharaoh. And the reason for that is because as human beings who are broken and sinful, we don't have the man-made tools to remove the frogs and the gnats of our life. God must remove them. And as broken human beings, we don't have the ability in and of ourselves to be content and to be strong and to be purpose-filled. That has to come from God. God's got to cultivate that in our hearts. We need God to change us from being like Pharaoh to being like Moses. And the good news of our God is he provides that. He knows that. He's doing that. That's what's happening in the plagues. Yes, he's bringing judgment upon Egypt. Yes, he's showing his power to Egypt, but he's also working in the hearts of the Israelites, and specifically, he's working in the heart of Moses. He's sanctifying the heart of Moses. He's making him to be this follower instead of merely an acknowledger. It's God, not yea Moses, yea God. Here is the beauty of our God, right? Our God is a gardener. Our heart, our soul is a garden. And we often think, okay, for that garden to grow, I have to do all the work. I've got to put the soil down. I've got to plant the seeds. I've got to pull the weeds. It's all up to me to cultivate and grow that garden. No. Your heart and your soul is a garden, but God is the master gardener. God is the cultivator. God is the one who makes that garden grow. Think of it like this. God the Father is the foreman. He's overseeing the whole project. He's planning the project. He's getting people where they need to be. He's overseeing the operation, and he cares about it. He can't wait to see it grow. The Son of God, Jesus Christ, he's the one that comes in and does the hard work, right? He's the one that lays the soil, and he gets his hands dirty, and he pulls the weeds, and he plants the seeds. And the Holy Spirit comes in, and he provides the rain and the sun. He allows the roots to grow and the fruit to come up. God is the one that is tending our garden and cultivating our hearts, just like we see in Moses. It's him. And that might lead us to say, wow, that's awesome. Praise be to God. And it should. But it also might lead us to say, so what do I do? Where am I at in this equation? Do I just sit on the side and do nothing? Your job is to open the gate. And not just open the gate once, but to open the gate of your garden every single day to God. It's to go to God and it's to ask him to do the work of justifying you and sanctifying you and making you whole. It's going to God and it's confessing, I can't do this on my own. I've tried to do it on my own. The ground is too rocky. I'm too stubborn. Lord, forgive me of my sins. Make me new. Renew me. I confess to you. And we ask God, don't grow my fruit. Don't give me the things I want. No, give me your fruit. Grow in the garden what you know I need, not what I want. God, grow your fruit. Don't make me more like me. Make me more like you. That's what I want in my garden. We open the gate. We confess. We talk. We walk with God. That's what Moses did. He was simply obedient. He walked with God. He did what God called him to do. He opened the gate. And that's what we do. And God does the rest. He produces the fruit. Praise be to him. Church, that's why we can't be mere acknowledgers of God. We can't do this from a distance. We ask him to come in. We see the glory of what he's doing. And as we see more and more fruit grow, as we see his glory all around us, we want to be followers. We want to be obedient to the work that he's doing. We want to be more like him, not more like us. The good news is that for those who have faith, and put their faith in Jesus Christ. When he died on the cross, we died with him. When he was buried in the ground, we were buried in the ground. And when he rose again, we rose again. Right? We're like a seed planted in the ground that dies and produces fruit. We died with Christ and we rise again with him. That is why Christ is the perfect gardener and cultivator of our souls. We are a new creation in him. We're united with him. We're made like him. And through the work of Christ, as we're united with him, as the Spirit makes us more like him, we become less and less like Pharaoh. We stop being acknowledgers and we become followers of Jesus Christ to fulfillment and contentment and joy. So church, what do we do? We give our life to the cause. We open the gate. We walk with God. We confess, and we act as followers, not merely as acknowledgers. If we want more of God, we need to just go to him and ask for him to come and cultivate our hearts. May we look more and more like Christ and less like Pharaoh every single day. Let's go to God in prayer. God, we thank you for the good news that for those of us that are endlessly trying to be like Moses or be like Christ and failing, Lord, we recognize it's not our work to do. It's your work. You're the one that's tilling the soil. You're the one that is slowly growing us and making us more like your Son. And for those of us that are passive and say, great, that means I don't have to do anything, Lord, may you stoke the fire of our hearts. May you allow us to say, no, I don't want to be passive. I want to go. I want to be like God. I want to be with God. I want to see him work in me and through me to accomplish his plans and his purposes. Lord, may you work in the heart of everyone here. Challenge us, convict us, and help us to see your glory in the world. God, make us more like followers and less like acknowledgers. Through your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. Church, now let's go to this God. Let's open the gate through musical worship.